Ladies and gentlemen, my name is TotalBiscuit. I'm here to ask and answer one simple question. WTF is Pyre? Maybe not so simple, this one. This is the third game from Supergiants. Those are the fellows that brought you Bastion and Transistor. To put into context how much I like Supergiants' work up to this point, Bastion was my game of the year it came out, and Transistor, I believe, was number 4. Transistor also won several arbitrary awards and nominations. So to say that I like Supergiants' work would, to some extent, be an understatement. But what we have with Pyre is a very interesting thing indeed. As I previewed this at PAX last year, I described it to you, and this appears to have popped up in the reviews of the actual game itself from other outlets, as a sports game in disguise. And sports is not something that Supergiant has really tried to get into, and seems to fly right in the face of their big narrative focus that they've had up to this point. Pyre is a very, very different game to Bastion and Transistor. Bastion and Transistor themselves were different enough. This is so different that really, if you were looking for identifiable elements that would say, hey, yeah, this is obviously a Supergiant game, those elements would come in the form of the music and the aesthetic and art used. Outside of that, it's an entirely new experience. Now, we will get into whether or not that in itself is a good thing, and how well these mechanics work, and how well their new approach to narrative works as we get into this. A prior warning before we start. So, this is about halfway through the game. There is, and if you really don't want any spoilers of any sort, even the most minor, just turn the video off now. It's impossible to avoid them if we're going to really look at this. I will avoid every story spoiler I can. I will say that at some point in the game opens up quite a bit, okay? And I have to show that because I think it's key to showing the game at its best. And also key to talking about things like linearity, which is something that Supergiant games have stuck to quite obsessively right up until Pyre. So you've been given that warning. I will avoid everything I possibly can. Let's head to the options menu first for a quick gander, see what's available. So you got things like cursor speed and your various music volume levels. You'll notice there is no separate announcer volume, and that is because actually the announcer this time around, while he is still here, and it's the same fellow in charge, he is not a key part of the majority of the game narrative. That's a big change, a big difference. But you do hear voices in a language you can't understand. The announcer you can understand, and then there are occasionally little parts where you may mysteriously understand, and you'll find that out as you go along. Subtitles on or off, that's for the voice during the write, so you don't need this on because the game has a lot of text in it anyway, so don't be worried about having this off. It's just going to give you a quick indication of the little voice during the battle system, which is called the writes. Move list on screen. That's always useful to have. Hurry text. So if you want to rush through story events, particularly useful for a replay. We'll talk about that in a minute. And an aim assist if you're finding things just to be a little bit of a problem. This is a good way to make the rather unusual battle system that may take some getting used to just that little bit easier to do. Now, difficulty-wise, this basically changes the difficulty of the writes. Up to this point, I've found that standard, for me anyway, has been a little bit easy, and I may choose to up it, but there are other ways to increase the difficulty in the game as well. As per previous Supergiant titles, they've put in optional modifiers that you gain access to at some point, which will crank that up a little bit. So the granular difficulty, the optional granular difficulty is there, but it's not given to you until much later in the game. So if you find the first few matches easy, don't be afraid to turn this up to heightened. The AI is mostly good, it's just the way the AI plays on standard is not necessarily all that challenging. But there's been a big variance in how people have experienced this because they're dealing with a system that is so wildly different to what a lot of them are used to using. So in terms of best control method, I think this is very subjective. I used a controller at PAX, and I found it just fine. I have used keyboard and mouse in my playthrough at home, and I found that just fine as well. You have different mouse presets, WASD presets, and your lovely little rebindable keys here. So if you want to do a QWER setup, which is quite like League of Legends, you can do that. It's more like first person. If you want to control your thing using pretty much only the mouse, you can do that as well. So they provided a lot of different options here. That's always a good thing. There are different save slots available. I don't want to click this because it'll probably spoil something, but you can have multiple playthroughs, and this game, perhaps more than any of previous Supergiants' work, does encourage doing it again because there are a lot more choices and it is ultimately a lot less linear. And basic display options. You're not going to find any way to crank the graphics up and down outside of changing resolution. It is not a very demanding game. It is a very artistically polished and accomplished game, but it is still primarily a 2D game that will run on fairly low-spec systems, and it even runs at 4K 60, I believe, on the PlayStation Pro, so you shouldn't really worry too much about that. Anything missing here in particular? Well, not really. I think maybe it would have still been nice to have just a couple of graphics options more than this. Just a couple. Because I get it, it's not very demanding, but you can never underestimate how much some people want to scale something or run a very new game on very, very old hardware. Now, you might be noticing something a little bit unusual. A versus mode in a Supergiant game. They've never done multiplayer before. Well, the disappointing thing about this is that it is local only. The not so disappointing thing is that it also allows you to play against CPU adversaries in a wide variety of different matches against different teams with different strategies at different levels with different gear with different difficulty modifiers. So, if you are engaged by the battle system, which I feel is almost essential to really enjoying the game to its absolute fullest, then this versus mode is going to give you a lot more of that. Were this an actual multiplayer mode, especially with, say, an added league, bearing in mind there's a league in the narrative campaign itself, this would be a phenomenal value add. As it stands in its current form, it's just pretty good. Just be aware, if you start to play this before finishing the game, there are some story spoilers about characters that appear. So if you want to completely avoid that, don't touch versus until you finish the game. But it's a great opportunity to play with a friend or play some AI matches, and there's a couple of ways to play local-only games over the internet. I think NVIDIA has a way to do it, so you can hodgepodge a few ways together. All right, we're going to continue the campaign. This is my last spoiler warning that I'm going to give you. It's about halfway through. I'm not going to warn you about that again. I'll do, as always, my absolute best to avoid story spoilers of any real significance. Here we go. Welcome to Pyre. What is Pyre? Well, it's been described in many different ways, but the way that I choose to describe it is the following. It is primarily a node-based choose-your-own-adventure backed up by a sports-style, team-based RPG real-time combat system. So here's basically how it works. You're traveling around in this, the Black Wagon. You're in the downside. Not a nice place to be. It's where people that get exiled generally get left. This is the inside of the Black Wagon. It's full of curios and strange things. This changes throughout the entire game. This is your little home base. It's a nice area to keep revisiting because there'll always be new things in it. You will get new features, and this book right here is going to tell you a lot about the lore of the world. We'll open it up. That's possibly nominee for Best Book Opening Animation of 2017. May make a category specifically for that. So you got a few months, the rest of the game devs, see if you can beat that. Just let's look at it. It's just a really nice book opening. Look at that. There's a lot of lore in here. The font is a little tricky to read, but if you use Inspect, it will just show it in an easier way. I must say, I would prefer having somebody read this to me. You know, I mentioned earlier that flying in the face of everything Supergiant's done before, where they've chosen to read a story to you for the most part, and they've done so in a very granular way in tiny little pieces as you advance. This time around, They have chosen to have text-heavy dialogue trees. We're going to have one right now. And they've chosen to dump quite a lot of lore in an optional book that if you wish to read it, you can. If you don't, it's not going to affect your ability to understand the story in and of itself. What they've also done, they tried a different method to maybe give you a little bit of a halfway house. It's talking about that granularity and making you remember little details. Well, what they have is this hyperlink system. So you hover over something that's highlighted in red there, and it's going to give you a little factoid about it. So they mentioned the Sea Dominion here. Well, it's a vast and war-torn undersea regime, of course. Home to untold numbers of amphibious worms. Sir Gilman is a worm. He happens to be on my team at the moment. More often than not, you get little interactions with your teammates in between missions. It is an opportunity to give them bonuses, to learn more about them. And some of these guys, they have a lot of personality. What Supergiant has done this time around is focused on a large ensemble cast, which is basically the polar opposite of their last two games, that were very focused on a very small number. Now, that small number of characters allowed them to narrate the whole experience quite easily. And Transistor, the voice from the sword, was narrating to your character. And then, of course, in Bastion, you had, the narrator whose identity you eventually found out saying, kid did this, kid did that. Two different types of doing it, but a very linear narrative delivery system that to me was extremely compelling. But as I click through here, you're probably saying words, 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 words. Yes, they've gone with a lot of words. They've definitely done that. Now, I feel that that is a necessary evil if you want a large ensemble cast. There are a huge number of characters in this game, and they're all very well fleshed out. If we head to the common room, you'll find just what I mean about that. So, this guy, and a spoiler because he's one of the first people you start with, it's going to tell you what he can do, going to give you a little description of what he is. And you see these? His sentencing, like why he was exiled, his motive, how long he's been exiled, his astral sign, etc. You don't know these yet. But through conversation, you can find that out, so you can really focus on the characters you care about. And there's way more than just these. There are way more than just that. I heard a rumor that there were characters in the 20s. It's entirely possible. But yeah, if you are interested in the character, you can find out more about them. You can do things for them. They'll suggest things for you to do on the map. If you're not so interested, don't engage with them. And they'll have little tit-for-tat spats with each other as well. So that's your first big difference, and it's going to be a first big decider for you. Did I just explain a deal breaker for you? Are you not a fan of wordy RPGs? Because this is now a wordy RPG, whereas Transistor was not. If you're not a fan of wordy RPGs, well, maybe you'll like the battle system then, which is the other main component of the game outside of this. Hell, I could spend a lot of time just clicking on things. And it's fun in that sort of Hearthstone layout kind of way. If I pester this drive imp over here, it's neat. And there's even some cool little interactions that can happen. You can actually annoy the people traveling with you by doing certain things. I was messing with this moonshine, and I drank enough of it, and Pamitha came and had a conversation with me about it. So this very interesting, fairly natural way of communicating with your characters and interacting with them without directly going through a big list and say, you want to talk to this person? They'll tell you where they are as well. So it's like, you don't get to talk to everyone all the time because they have minds of their own, they have their own things to do. I mentioned music. Well, eventually you will get, as you have in all of the others, a little jukebox, and there is some incredible stuff in here. Absolutely awesome. I would prefer this was a bit easier to browse. It's a bit jank, frankly. But I'd like to play you one of my personal favorites. There's a huge amount of variety in it. There are some vocal tracks, same vocalist as last time. But this one in particular, I really enjoy because it's a little dirty, it's a little rocky, it's got a little bit of metal in it. Check it out, it's called Thrash Pack. And you know what the really cool thing about that is? That's not the only version of that. That's not the main version. This is a version played on a lute, because the jukebox here is a lute. The musician that travels with you, that's his interpretation. You remember the way that Transistor had a whistling version? Or a sort of humming version of the song? Yeah, that's basically how this works as well. So you could listen to various different forms of the same track, and it is quite literally like listening to a minstrel play it. There's a lot going on here. Supergiant games are always these really cool artistic works, and if you get immersed in that, you can quite literally spend hours just messing around with this stuff, and I have. Like, I'm looking at my time on Steam, and I'm looking at 8 hours, and I know I'm not even halfway through the game, really. But I think this game in particular gives you a lot more opportunity to mess around and explore things and read and learn about the universe and interact, whereas the other games have been more linear and said, go here, do this, go here, do this. Right, okay. We are going to demonstrate what's basically going to happen as part of your core gameplay loop here. So that was inside the black wagon. If I say continue my journey, then it is going to show me where the next ride is. In this case, it is the Cairn of Haub. We're going to be fighting a team of dogs. So along goes our little black wagon, powered by imps. Apparently, we have encountered a messenger imp with our rumors. Now, I have deliberately censored all of what I just showed you because that was actually a spoiler related to something, and I don't want to show you that. So, let's just say what just happened, the message that I just got, was a direct result of a decision that I made previously in the game. That is honestly something that Supergiant games have never really done a huge amount of before. They kind of give you that illusion that your choices really make a difference because they have that narrator reacting to it. But if you focus on text, you have way more freedom in that regard. And you can really make it obvious and clear that the actions you took had a real consequence. All right, let's buy some stuff before we do this, because the main battle, called the Rites, they are kind of based on your equipment, your stats and things like that. So, do I have anything that I want to sell? I'm looking through the slug market, because of course he rides Big Slug, why wouldn't he? I'm thinking, is there anything kind of valuable here? I'm thinking this Burning Promise is quite nice. Thinking that, and maybe I sell this because I don't like it so much. Maybe I buy a Scoop of Stardust, and that would allow me to potentially upgrade this if I wanted to. And we take that, we drag the Scoop of Stardust over. Apparently we can't enhance that particular talisman. Alright, never mind. Most talismans you can enhance. Like say I could enhance this one. If we go to gear here, you'll see how the equipment system works. So you are able to equip each character with a talisman. So if I were to put Burning Promise on Headwind, then after dousing the adversary's pyre, the bearer earns a reward, up to 3 times plus 5 gold. Now, normally you'd be able to upgrade that. It turns out Stardust is not, you're not allowed to do that. It's probably a balance issue, I would imagine. So you can see what each of my fellows has here. And they've got these 4 different stats, which determine what they can do, and a whole new skill set every time. That's the nice thing about these characters. There are no duplicates. They all do completely different things. They have different playstyles, and by picking 3 in a team, you can unlock a wildly in-depth set of strategies, tactics, and combat systems. You can also level up your characters, which allow you to gain masteries. And these masteries, while there aren't all that many of them, and I'd probably like to see more, are all very influential. I've been on this crusade, I think, for the last couple of years. I'm going to keep saying it until it happens. Upgrade systems should always feel meaningful. Every time you have an upgrade, it should make such an impact on the game that it is immediately noticeable. Otherwise, what's the point? And all of these masteries do just that. So you're not upgrading very often, but when you do, you feel it. You really feel it. So yeah, that's basically how the talisman system works. It would maybe be nice to be able to equip more than one, so that you could customize a little more. I've seen a lot of really cool talismans that I'd like to use, but some of them are just, they're not quite as good as something else could be. So it's a bit of a concern. I do like the way you can upgrade them, though. So I took the Mooncrest up rank, so now after being banished by an adversary, this guy has almost a 50% chance of coming back. And in fact, I can get him up to 60% because I bought that. There you go. Nice big upgrade. So he's got a chance of immediately popping back up. Right. We've bought. Commence to the right and listen up, because everybody's favorite narrator is making his reappearance. Eventually. Yes, that character's called Bay. You had a choice of about 30 or 40 preset names for this character that all ended in AE. And because I wanted the announcer to repeatedly have to say Bay in the most serious way possible, because I am not funny, I chose that. What can I say? I like to ruin art. I'll say the game also has a much lighter tone than previous titles, both visually and in terms of the narrative humor.
You exiles of the Night Winds, you are returned once more unto the cairn of Haub. The adversaries you are to confront shall be the Fate. Whosoever pyre yet burns ere the break of dawn shall surge forward on the path to glory. Now prepare yourselves.
All right. Well, you just heard the wonderful, wonderful narration, and he'll continue as kind of like a sportscaster throughout it, which is a nice role for him, but certainly a much more limited role than we've seen him previously. He's not just narrating your story all the way through this time for a couple of characters. And that's by necessity, as I said, big ensemble cast. But yeah, going back to that idea, like, think about the themes of Bastion and Transistor. They were two very inherently sad games. And Transistor in particular, I think, was. They had moments of levity, sure, but there are a lot more moments of levity in this game. And that is by design. No doubt, I think. All right, who shall we go with? Well, we get to choose 3 people. Let's go with Sir Gilman.
Sir Gilman.
Indeed. He's one of my favorite characters. It's very funny. And this guy, also known as Sell Me a Plush of Tizo Immediately.
Tizo.
He's a little imp that explodes. And as to my last character, tough call. I want to demonstrate, like, the variety of stuff that you can do in this game. One of these can fly. We could maybe go with Rookie. If you want to go for like a really fast team, this is a very fast team. There's a lot of choices here. And if you leave characters out, they gain basically rested experience. So it makes sure that you're not having people fall behind. And that gets very important later in the game as the ensemble cast becomes a huge deal in ways that I don't want to spoil. You can also check out your adversaries. Every time you fight them, they get more powerful. So they get new equipment, they get new abilities, and their stats are going to level up as well. So the first time you fight them will be a very different experience to the second. So you may have to shake up your strat a little bit. I'm going to go for my speed strategy because I think it works very well. It's been solid up to this point. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. So, let me explain this mode to you. I'll try my best to also not lose in the process.
It is done.
So, the RPG battle mechanic of this game, which is the main mechanic, and there's going to be a lot of this, so if you don't enjoy this mechanic, that could be a problem for you, is it is a 3-on-3 sports-like real-time RPG battle system, whereby you have to collect a magic orb, the ball, get a hold of it, and get it into your opponent's pyre. Or, you know, the goal. Probably a good way of describing it. There's the ball over there. Now, when you pick up the ball, your so-called aura disappears. The aura is kind of what's protecting you. It's your power being pushed out. If somebody walks into my aura, they will be banished for a brief amount of time. But you can also throw your aura, which will cause an energy bolt of varying sizes to blast across the battlefield. In this case, I have this guy upgraded, so my aura remains on the ground a lot longer, so it's quite difficult for the opponents to get past it. Some of the large characters, like the big demons, have really big auras, and you can affect the size of the auras via the so-called presence stat. And everyone has kind of different ways to attack. Like, most people have a way of dodging. In this case, I can actually, as you can see, teleport. I can create a stream and then teleport to part on that stream. the imp character, I could blow it up, which will blow up anything else in the area. Generally comes back pretty quickly. And so Gilman has it and swings him around, and there we go. I won't go for a very speed-heavy strategy. And you'll notice that Pyre is getting weaker and weaker every time I score. As to how weak, it really depends on the character that does the scoring and how they do it. You can score by either running it in, or you can score by throwing it. I haven't found much success with throwing, but there are some characters that are very committed to that, and you can buff up the speed at which you can throw, which means if they have a very strong defense and they're just not letting you in, you may just be able to throw it over them. It's also possible to jump up and intercept a ball. As I said, it is a sports game, whether it wants to admit it or not. There we go. What I did there was I tossed the ball right back to Tizo at the back, quickly did a few dashes, and Tizo can fly, so I could like flutter him over the top of other enemies. So, yeah, there's so much that I can do with that. The Mooncrest item that I bought earlier just triggered, which means that my guy immediately came back from banishment. There's an interesting little idea as well. When you run the ball into a Pyre, you actually... hoping to grab it, didn't quite pull it off. Your character is banished until the enemy team scores. So you actually end up in this weird disadvantage where it's actually 2-on-3. Now, this serves a very important mechanical purpose. Not only does it make the games a little bit more swingy, so you don't necessarily have total dominations. I always like the idea of making that things a little bit more interesting like that. But it means that if you found what appears to be a winning strat, you can't use it 3 or 4 times in a row to win. You just can't do it, because the key character that's part of it is no longer on the battlefield. You are forced by necessity, by absolute necessity, to come up with something new. And there is so much depth to this system, good lord. And for instance, my imp is upgraded in a way that when he dies, he leaves a portal. And the other side of the portal is just behind my Pyre. So if I can rush my imp forward, blow him up, take out 2 guys, immediately switch to a character near that portal, grab the ball, jump into the portal, and then score. There's so many ways to do it. The depth of this combat system is incredible. Absolutely incredible. You might be getting maybe a little bit of a blitzball vibe from it, and I've tried through various comparison and analogy to explain this game to people, because it is such a unique and interesting and strange game. And the best way I can kind of do it to some people is to say, imagine if Final Fantasy X had the RPG parts as the side game, that was the mini game, and the main focus was the blitzball. I think a lot of people actually turn around and say, I wish that was true. Well, in this game, that is exactly what it is. Some others have compared it to Banner Saga in the way that it is choose your own adventure and resource management, leveling up and RPG stuff, and then a battle system. And in this case, it's a real-time sports-based battle system. And frankly, people got caught up on elements of Banner Saga as well. If you didn't enjoy the battle system, you may have problems with it. But here's something very interesting. This game does not stop you from progressing if you lose a battle. There is no express failure state. There are implied failure states, of course. There are implied failure states. Losing a battle is not something anyone wants to do. You don't get as much experience, and there are narrative consequences to that. And that is important. That is very important. But Supergiant decided it made no sense to just have a game over and force you back into the same battle again. No, let people progress. You failed, that's fine. It fits with the lore perfectly. Not to spoil too much, but trust me, it does. That makes absolute perfect sense. And these rights aren't about killing people. People don't die in them. It's a right to gain your freedom as an exile, a sacred right that can only be understood by very few people who are able to read, and reading in this world is outlawed. I find myself completely enamored by this thing as an exercise in seeing just how far a studio can move from successful ideas to completely new ones, and be willing to take that risk. And make no mistake about it, moving away from that small character-focused, narratively narration-driven gameplay style is a risk. It's a big risk. Putting this real-time sports game type thing in here when you're otherwise making a choose-your-own adventure/RPG, that's a potential huge risk. And by the way, here's the real version of this music. No loots here. Let's wait for it to kick in. Yeah, so good. Anyway, it's it's a radical departure, and I think maybe the game might need advocates as a result of that. But that is not to say that it is perfect by any stretch of the imagination. Yes, studios shouldn't be typecast based on their previous successes. And while it's okay to be disappointed that they didn't make another Transistor or another Bastion, we should still look at the work and the quality of the work on display. There are some relatively major issues. Firstly, I do think that the AI is a little simple on the standard mode, and I think that turning it up will help. Not gaining access to the optional idols to bump that difficulty up earlier than when you do, I think is unwise, and does mean the pacing gets a little slow. And this ties into a big point. The game does not have a New Game Plus mode. Yes, it's got lots of replayability, but it means you have to go right back to the start and play through a bunch of stuff again that you've already played. You can hold down space, sure, but you're dealing most likely with much, much easier fights that haven't scaled up properly. A New Game Plus mode should take into account the fact that you know all of this. Where do we get these from? So cool. New Game Plus mode should take into account the fact that you are a more accomplished, experienced player. Well, there isn't one. I think that is a pretty major omission. And while, yes, you can replay the game, the method by which they've allowed you to do that is a suboptimal one that is going to annoy some people. And it's going to be less enjoyable than the previous New Game Pluses that they have done in their previous games. I'm hoping that that gets implemented as post-launch content. I genuinely do. But I think that along with that lack of actual online multiplayer for a game that is actually a very competitive one, as well as being a narratively driven one, is an omission that is worth noting. It is a black mark on the game, no doubt. I will say for me personally that the extensive amounts of text has resulted in me finding it hard to absorb the finer points of the lore. These little hyperlinks don't really work for me, but I don't learn the same way as other people. I find it very easy to track the lore when I'm being narrated to, because they've taken that away. I can definitely keep track of I know what our goal is, and I'm slowly, as I revisit these zones, learning about the people in them and the kind of zones, and also the personalities of my comrades. That's delivered well through text. The lore of the old world and the scribes and the ancient rites, that's gone right over my head. It's just pages and pages of text. A lot of people are going to like that. I could see Jesse really getting into it. I might even watch a Jesse Let's Play of this, because he'd handle that a lot better, honestly. I don't think that that is something that I enjoy as much as what they've done previously. I understand the necessity for it, but it certainly has prevented me from getting as immersed in their new world as I did in the previous ones, which is a shame because their new world is much bigger, more expansive, and frankly more creative than any of their previous worlds. And that's saying a lot because Transistor was pretty damn creative. But there are tons of branching paths and a lot of options. That means lots of replayability, and it means that people won't have the same playthrough as somebody else. That is a good thing. There are so many more things that I could talk about. I could talk about the idea that because there are times when people will leave your party, and I won't tell you why, you will be forced to use different teams and not stick with one for too long. That makes the combat system far more interesting and enjoyable. But the combat system is hampered by that AI. Particularly, I noticed one level where I was fighting against a team of these harpies. I have one on my team right now. And they would just keep throwing themselves into the lava and dying. I'm hoping that's been fixed. They've patched this 6 times since launch. But that made the whole match a bit of a waste of everybody's time, honestly. Which was unfortunate. If you have any doubts once you've played the first few matches and thought, okay, I've got the hang of this combat system, it's not causing me a major problem, turn it up to hard. I think that's the way to go until you get access to the idols. It's longer than the previous games. It's a better value proposition as far as I'm concerned. It's linear, but with way more maneuverability in the middle. You know, games have starts, middles, and endings. Everyone knows that, but how much flexibility you have in the middle is often how a game is defined in terms of its linearity. Compared to the previous two games, there is far more flexibility in that middle area. I've got to applaud them for taking some big risks here. I think the base mechanics are fantastic. The gearing up progress and process is very enjoyable. The conversations with the sidecast have turned out to be engaging. I'm finding myself liking certain characters, whether it be for their mannerisms or for their really expressive pieces of art. Whether it just be due to their personality and things they say. And I know there's so many more that I'm going to get to meet. And that this is a truly beautiful, awe-inspiring, original, brave journey on their part. This is a studio that refuses to get stuck into a rut. They refuse to sit on their past successes or sit on their past laurels, and they could very easily just produce a Transistor 2 or Bastion 2, more of the same that they know people like. But they don't. This is a wildly different game, with wildly different goals and mechanics, and a wildly different vision. Different design philosophies. Whatever genre this is, and there's a lot of disagreement on it, I'd just like to describe it as Pyre and take it as that. I hope what I've been able to do in the last 40 or so minutes was adequately explain how this game works and give you indications as to whether or not you personally are going to enjoy it relative to what I just said. I know right now that I am entranced by it, and it's easily my favorite game of the year so far. You know that I'm really big into Supergiant stuff, but I think the very interesting thing about this one is that this is the least Supergiant game that there is, and yet it may very well be the most accomplished, despite it perhaps having the most glaring flaws, simply because of how dangerously innovative it is. It's a hell of a thing. Hell of a thing. Nobody's done this before, and I wonder if they ever will again. Maybe there's only one studio that can make something like this. Maybe that's Supergiant, and I wish them success on this, and I hope that the next game that we get is a complete surprise as well. Just keep being crazy, folks at Supergiant, please. As I've mentioned time and again, critics, we often pursue the new and the innovative and the bold and the dangerous and the creative and the risky because we've played so many of the safe. And safe is totally fine for consumers. Got to pay for your games. I understand. But every now and again, there's an experience so unique that it's worth taking a chance. And I think you really should take a chance on Supergiant's Pyre. I did, and I'm just really happy that it's here. Pyre, ladies and gentlemen. Currently available on Steam for $20 or your regional equivalent. Also available on the PS4 platform. If you enjoyed this video, by all means do feel free to click the like button. If not, the dislike button is right over there. And for discussion, I direct you to our official subreddit, which will have a thread about this. And you can feel free to talk over there to your heart's content. And what we're going to do is we're going to set up a separate thread for spoiler discussion. So you'll be able to discuss story, what happened there, favorite characters, etc. if you've beaten it. And we'll have 2 threads going. I think that's a good organized way to do it. And we'll make sure it's moderated so nobody can come in and troll the other. Thank you very much for watching, folks. I'll admit, this video has been an intimidating one to do. It should have been done days ago, but it scared me. I didn't know if I could do it justice. I didn't know if I still had it in me. I've had a lot of doubts over the last few months because of the treatment, because of how things have been going and how few videos I've been putting out. But it's games like this that remind me why. So thank you to you for watching, and to Supergiant for creating, and to this really awesome medium that you're never quite sure what you're going to see next in. I'll see you next time.